No matter how many times I revisit the village of Riverwood, I can't help but grin. It's a homely place, a small milling settlement situated along the White River, and, on most conventional Skyrim playthroughs, the first town that you come across. It's a good place to return to on occasion. But today's video isn't focused on Riverwood at all really, but rather it's a start point, as what we're going to be exploring is nearby. You see, to the southwest of this agreeable enough Nord village, immersed in a pleasant, moderate woodland, within eyeshot of the daunting Bleak Falls Barrow, we can find a rather cosy looking cabin that, for obvious reasons, wouldn't be ideal in the rain. Occupying this cabin, we meet an old lady, and her name is Anise, a pleasant enough seeming hermitess who lives out in the wild, away from Skyrim's broader society. Which is an interesting choice considering the dangers of the wilderness, but she seems to get by just fine. However, if you can't shake that there is something curious to this Anise, then you're absolutely right, because she has something of a secret that in today's video we shall endeavour to explore. So to begin with, finding Anise's cabin is fairly straightforward. Like I just said, it's situated to the southwest of Riverwood. Here we can find Anise doing whatever it is that she does. For me, that appears to be indecisively flicking between sitting in a chair and tending to her vegetable patch. When interacted with, there's no conversation tree, but she does have a few lines of dialogue.
I'm just a poor old woman, dear. No need to trouble yourself with me. It's so nice to have a visitor. It's tough just scraping by out here, but I make do. I get so lonely out here.
So first impressions tend to be of the positive variety. Anise appears to be a friendly, but rather introverted and lonely individual, whose dialogue would suggest that she's pleased to have some company. It would seem she gets by on what the land provides, and her home is as lavish as a glorified garden shed. There's nothing majorly untoward about her or her home, and judging by her reading material and the presence of ingredients all over the shop, I think it's a reasonable assumption that Anise is something of an alchemist. The apothecary supplies, however, are made suspicious by the absence of an alchemy lab. In fact, Anise's cabin is very simple living indeed. She has a modest assortment of food and ingredients, some reading material, somewhere to sleep, and a roof that is not fit for purpose. Maybe she simply is the poor old woman she claims to be, living out in the sticks away from the safety and numbers of society because it's a more dignified life than being a beggar in the cities, if not unsafe. However, there is one fascinating detail about Anise's cabin that I am yet to mention, and that is of course a hatch that would seemingly lead to a basement. It's locked with a novice level lock. Provided you have a couple of lockpicks, it should be no problem at all. And it's down here that things quickly get curious. In Anise's basement, not only does she have an alchemy lab, but also an enchanting table that would suggest she's magically capable, some human skulls that aren't unsettling in the slightest, though in her defence, this is a fairly commonplace decor in the Elder Scrolls universe apparently, and on a counter we can find an inkwell, a quill, and the letter Anise has been drafting, and it reads as follows. Helgi dear, why do you hesitate? You can feel the power coursing in your blood. You have only to reach out and grasp it. Renounce that boy of yours and come live with me in the forest. My sister will be here soon. Together we can form a proper coven, and your training will truly begin. And so it would seem our suspicions that there's more to this old lady living in the forest have been vindicated. As the letter suggests, she intends to form a coven. Now, of course, the word coven meaning a group of witches means that Anise is a witch. And upon making this discovery, if we head back upstairs, I think it's a reasonable assumption that Anise is not thrilled by our nosiness.
Is fool. Know my secret.
And so suddenly, the reclusive, friendly old lady has become a hostile witch. And so for that, she must die. So with Anise dealt with, it's time to turn our focus to what all of this means. As the Elder Scrolls games make a distinction between what classes as a mage and what classes as a witch. Mages tend to study magic as an academic interest, whereas witches treat it more religiously. Witch covens appear more prominently in the Elder Scrolls II, Daggerfall, and it appears those covens tend to be dedicated to Daedric princes, being able to go as far as summoning them. That's not necessarily the case for Anise, as she's a witch without a coven, but her intent to form one won't necessarily make her an upstanding member of society. And if her letter to Helgi is any indication, begging she forsake that boy of hers and join her in the woods and realise her own powerful magical potential, not to mention Anise's own existence in a crudely thrown together cabin in the woods, I think it's safe to assume she doesn't have much time for society. Therefore it's unlikely she has any interest in benefiting it, a point further proven when she attempts to murder us for discovering her secret. In Skyrim, witches exist as an enemy archetype. They dwell in covens with other witches and are typically led by a hagraven. And as far as the beasts of Skyrim go, you'd be hard-pressed to find something more fitting of the word abomination than a hagraven. A horrifying mixture of woman and bird that sacrificed their humanity in exchange for potent magical powers. They retain some modicum of being able to communicate, but they're typically viewed as extremely hostile, something we can attest to with first-hand accounts in the game, and are deemed cunning, depraved and repulsive, though they're revered among the Forsworn of the Reach as matriarchs, but can also be met dwelling amidst witches and hags. But let's not get too carried away. How, if at all, is this relevant to Anise? Well, in her cabin we can find hagraven feathers, and the same can be said for in her basement. Not to mention a hagraven claw in her apothecary satchel, and I can't imagine those ingredients are awfully easy to come by unless you really know where to look. So with that in mind, we can link Anise to hagravens, or at least indeed a hagraven, which probably won't make her a candidate for Citizen of the Month. More on where that might be going in a moment, but for now, who is this Helgi in this letter? A relative of Anise's perhaps? Or just a protege she's attempting to groom? She doesn't seem awfully interested in joining this coven. Not that she'll ever receive that letter anyway, thanks to our efforts. Well, there is an NPC in Skyrim named Helgi, who can be found during the quest Laid to Rest in Mortal. However, I am highly doubtful that she has any relevance to Anise, because firstly, she's a child, and the vague address of that Helgi's situation wouldn't suggest that she was a child, and secondly, she's a ghost. With this in mind, it's tricky to rationalise that this is the Helgi that Anise is attempting to communicate with, as the draft of the letter begs her to renounce that boy of hers, which either suggests she's a young woman with a romantic partner, or she has a son. I'd imagine it's probably the former, so I doubt she's attempting to contact a child who died in a house fire, somehow. And if she was, she's preempting by some margin. And so that's kind of that. Helgi appears to be something of a dead end. All we know is the correct Helgi likely exists somewhere out there in canon, if not in physical presence in the game. But I highly doubt the child who has died in a house fire and become wrapped up in a quest revolving around vampires in Morthal is her. However, there is one other person mentioned in Anise's draft letter, and that is of course her sister, who doesn't get acknowledged with as much as a name. The letter simply refers to her as my sister. Though the letter states she'll be here soon, that's not something that can be observed in game. But who could she possibly be? Clearly she's somebody magically inclined, just like Anise, perhaps another witch. After all, it would seem they intend to form a coven. However, something interesting happens should you choose to steal from Anise's cabin. Regardless of whether she's alive or dead, the items within the cabin are still marked as steal, and these items are flagged in the game files as belonging to a faction known as the Hagraven faction, meaning should you choose to steal from the cabin, or indeed Anise, there's a chance you may trigger a particular world event, in which you're accosted by hired thugs who intend to teach you a lesson, and upon teaching them the lesson of death, you can loot the contract on you from their remains, revealing the identity of whoever sent the thugs. And provided stealing from Anise's cabin is what triggered this event to occur, this letter may be signed by a woman named Moira. So who is this Moira? Could this be Anise's sister? It's worth noting before we can continue that Skyrim's chop and change letters, if you will, are known to be able to get quite scuffed. For instance, it's possible to receive a letter of condolences from the Jarl regarding the death of a bandit, or indeed a letter from a friend regarding your use of the Thuum in an obscure location where nobody is present, or at least where your existence of the Dragonborn is irrelevant, but you get the idea. The letter on the hired thug's remains being signed by Moira is simply an indicator that there is a Moira who belongs to this Hagraven faction to which the items you stole were attributed. Nevertheless, this Moira is findable in-game, so let's follow it to the end. Upon reaching level 14 and heading to the nearest tavern, there will be a mysterious character named Sam Gavin who will challenge you to a drinking contest, one that gets a bit out of hand. You wind up blacking out, not remembering anything, and waking up in Markarth in a whole heap of trouble, leaving you to retrace your steps all the way to Isolde in Whiterun, who claims she gave you a ring on credit so you could wed your betrothed whom you met in Witchmist Grove. And though that sounds like an absolutely unhinged bender, it is a Daedra quest, so yeah. Nevertheless, upon arrival at Witchmist Grove, we come face to face with our betrothed. Apparently. A Hagraven named Moira. So the theory goes, could this be Anise's sister? A disgusting beast that sacrificed its humanity for power. While the connection is flimsy on account of how Skyrim is built, let's put this monstrosity to the sword while we evaluate this. We know which covens tend to be subservient to Hagravens, if not comprised of Hagravens to begin with, and we also know that Anise is a witch who intends to form a coven. Furthermore, there are Hagraven bits that can be found in her cabin and basement that would suggest she's come into contact with one recently, or at least knew where one had dwelt to collect the ingredients. And Moira will send thugs after you if you steal from Anise, and some players have claimed to encounter the revenge variant of this letter regarding Anise being killed by the player, also signed by Moira, though I couldn't find anything concrete on that. However, as a mitigating factor, it does appear as if this letter can be signed by any member of the Hagraven faction, and according to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, the entire thing is considered a bug. Regardless, Anise's sister being a Hagraven would make sense, as Hagravens start out as witches that undergo a particular ritual that transforms them into these horrors in exchange for harnessing dark magic. A process we can see being attempted at Darklight Tower, in which we meet a character named Ilia whose mother intends to become a Hagraven but needs a human sacrifice. However, she intends to stop her, so we fight our way up the tower against witches, hags and Hagravens to prevent the ritual from taking place. It's not impossible to believe, based on the resources found around Anise's cabin and her connection to the Hagraven faction, that her sister could indeed be one. It is unclear if it was intended to be implied to be Moira, but I quite like the idea. So with that in mind, Anise's secret is she's a witch intending to form a coven nearby to the lovely village of Riverwood. And if the sister she claims to have is a Hagraven, it implies the practice of dark magic a little bit too close for comfort. And perhaps there's some element of convenience to having this town full of mortals nearby. For instance, perhaps the time would come she'd need a ritual sacrifice of her own, intending to become a Hagraven herself, needing a coven to achieve that end. After all, there's got to be a reason she desires one. Not that there's explicitly evidence to support that, it's just not a wacky idea either. After all, Hagravens and those who throw in with Hagravens are cruel and self-serving, so I find it hard to believe that Anise didn't have something planned. Anyway, I don't want this video to be stupidly long, as there's not enough information to justify it being terribly lengthy, but I'd like to put that theory forward that Anise intended to become a Hagraven. I mean, her secret was, as far as we're aware, she was a witch living nearby to a Nord village, and Nords are quite suspicious of magic users in general, but to me that isn't enough to justify her going completely feral upon us discovering her basement. So what if she didn't intend to form a coven at all? What if the letter was her luring Helgi to her so that she could be used as a sacrifice? I know it's both reading between the lines and between lines that aren't present, but it would explain the dissonance between her demeanour and how quickly she becomes hostile. And considering her association with the Hagravens, I can't help but think becoming one isn't too outlandish of an objective. Nevertheless, you'll have to let me know what you think about my descent into madness in the comments section, because I'm going to wrap this video up here. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. Maybe drop me a follow on social media. I don't typically post things relevant to anything I post on YouTube, but I do have a dog. I've got a few more of these videos planned, and I look forward to adding them to this playlist. This is the 6th video that I've added to it. Hopefully, I'm not making too much of a hash of the lore. It is the Elder Scrolls, though. But with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care and goodbye.